Introduction and thank you all for being here. Let me see if I could share my screen. And then we could, like I said, and like Steven said, feel free to interrupt me at any time.
Yeah, and I'll watch the chat in case people have questions in there. I'll let you know.
Okay, sounds good. Can anybody see this one here? So it's just a general, basically, title that I have because it's kind of representative of where I come from. So a dreamer is a label that I was given a while back in the early 2000s for people like me that were undocumented, and they were dreamers basically in chase of hopefully achieving one day U.S. citizenship or a legal status in this country. So I will tell you briefly about my path, how I got to where I am and what I do right now and how I approach chemistry and what can we do with computational chemistry. So early on, I was basically started like everybody else. I started in when my mom and my dad met. They're right there in 1970, they got married. I was born. That's not my child. That's actually my child. That's not a picture of me. We were really poor, so we never really had enough money for a camera or anything. So there's no evidence, basically no pictures of me of when I was really young. Nonetheless, I wish I could tell you that I was inspired to become a chemist because of the large petrochemical industry. So when I was born in Mexico, it's actually has the largest refinery of oil in Mexico. So that's in Salamanca, Guanajuato. And as that little picture in the bottom that you can see the Rancho Los Prietos. So let me see if I could, please, no, not that one. Yeah, this one here is actually the second remodel home that we had. So we were born in an adobe house. So it's made out of mud. It was 2 rooms. It was a family at that time of 12, and including my mom and my dad. So in one room, all the kids basically slept, 10 of us. And then the other room, my mom and my dad, that was the room that we also used after they woke up for a kitchen and everything else. It was a living room and everything else. And it was during this period that in the late 1993, actually, that things started to get really bad in Mexico. And my family needed to make a decision whether to remain in Mexico or, like many other families, go up north and migrate to the United States. They all decided to migrate except me. They decided that I would stay with my grandpa, because at that time I was already, I guess, a well-established shepherd in the town. I already had basically, I think at that time, like 15, 20 sheep. And I figured that if I continue my trajectory in the next 10 years, I could have 150 and you can make a really good living with 150 sheep. That was my idea. So they decided that, yeah, I think that will work out. Everybody will move. And then I will stay in Mexico. So the first half of the family moved to the United States. I remained there. And then the second half of the family, we're gonna go. And it happened for a pair of shoes, actually, that things change. So my grandpa, when we sell the sheep or the cattle, but it was sheep at this time, basically he went and spent the money on things that we needed to prepare for the next 6 months. And in that, one of the things is that he bought me some shoes, but he also made a mistake, I think. And he also bought some shoes for my cousin, and he bought him a more expensive pair of shoes. So when my dad found out that he bought my cousin more expensive shoes, and I got the ones that were really, really inexpensive. They're actually made out of cloth. So basically they're like the cheaper version of Tom's shoes. And at that moment, my dad decided that, no, you're actually coming with us. And so it was a decision that was out of the moment. I was already prepared. I was already moved with my grandpa. And it kind of shows that you could plan for many things in your life, but you always have to be ready for those key moments where things might change and you just make a U-turn, right? So I make the best out of it. I never kind of questioned that decision. I figured that my dad knew best, and whether I agree or disagree, I was going to go with him. So at that moment, I made a decision that I was not going to be back to see my grandpa until I became a doctor. And that becomes critical because at that moment, for no reason at all, I just decided that I want to become a doctor. And why a doctor is something that I always kind of, I think of the media that I saw in TV, that if you go to the land of opportunities, then be the best that you can be. And for me, the best that you can be was to become a doctor. And that's the whole reason why I want to pursue becoming a doctor. So in that, I want to emphasize to always have a dream, always have a goal, right? Whether you achieve that goal or not, it's going to take you somewhere if you keep basically persistent to that goal. So we immigrated with the whole family. That's basically us, the one on the top, you can see we have kind of fancy clothes. In reality, all that fancy clothes was uh we only wear it once. It was my uncle that gave us a gift. We bought all this clothes and we never used it again. And one of the reasons why we never used it again is, first, if you dress like that in the hood, you're gonna get popped, right? Basically, you're gonna get jumped, and you're not gonna be dressing like that in the hood. So, but nonetheless, it's a nice picture that we have. And one of the things I want to kind of highlight is that during that time that I was in California, actually California was not very receptive to undocumented immigrants. Now they are, now that they might be a little more, but at that time it was a really, really bad environment for undocumented students there, or people. So the people there, as you can see from this one here, it was the people that voted for this proposition to basically cut all services for undocumented immigrants. So that put us in an awkward position. It made me kind of question my dad of why did he brought us to California or to the United States, right? To this hostile environment. I think we were better off, and maybe in Mexico we didn't face these issues. Nonetheless, we thrive, and at that moment I just wanted to kind of survive. As you can see from this sweater here, I wanted to pursue, basically, I was already kind of thinking about maybe going to the university, and UCLA is one sweater that looked kind of cool. It turns out that I eventually went to UCLA. So here's where my family, the graduation, we graduated in 2001. I will mention that actually the family never got reunited. So we never have a picture of us together. Once we departed, we never came, and it's not going to happen anymore. So if you can see, you can probably pinpoint at those that are Photoshop. And for one reason or another, it's just we're never together again. And I just don't see that ever happening again. So when I went to high school, I met with a community college with a counselor, and one of the things that she mentioned is that for people like me, they couldn't attend the university, right? Because I was undocumented. I was, Osvaldo, you actually no, you cannot afford the university. I think you should be thinking of alternative careers. So I kind of just gave up on school. I was a straight A student, and then I became a straight F student. So I graduated from high school with a GPA of, I think, a 1.83 or around there. Barely graduated, barely made the cut. Nonetheless, I was still interested in college, and thinking about maybe one way to get into college and whatnot. And finally, the opportunity came about that I was able to enroll in community college. And as you can see, my grades were not the best. Pre-calculus, I got a C. Chemistry, I even got a C. But I was committed to keep excelling in this. To the point that I even took the MCAT because I wanted to become a doctor, and I scored actually above the average. So I figured once I got a little more education at the 4-year university, I might be in good shape to go to medical school. And during that time, to support myself, I work in various different jobs. One is the Oak Park Market. It's in Sacramento. Don't go there. It's a place that you find anything and everything except hot Chinese food, as this logo says, right? So don't go there. Nonetheless, at that moment, I got into UCLA. I went to work with Professor Ken Houck. This is my car that I took. Basically, after the first semester, I had to sell the car because I didn't have any money to pay for the second year of second semester. And the only reason why I joined the Professor Houck group is because of an email from an undergraduate that was with Garcia Garibay that said that actually Houck was very receptive for undergraduates. And two, he's the only professor at UCLA that responded. So none of the other professors responded. So I was very thankful for Professor Houck kind of saying, without even knowing me, he said, yeah, yes, come and meet with me and we'll provide an opportunity for you. So I'm really extremely thankful for that. And that's one of the reasons why, like Stephen, we like to provide opportunities for undergraduates, because it tends to be that even the students that really want an opportunity, oftentimes that the main struggle is finding that research opportunity. So if you're here, I think you start seeing that. So I was on my way to graduate and go to medical school. My goal was really to go to Stanford Medical School. So I gave him a call. I had everything. I had basically the grades, I had the letters. And I will mention again, the only reason why I went to UCLA is that because a professor, Garcia Garibay, told me that if I went to UCLA and if I get a straight A's, that I was guaranteed a stop at the medical school. I was like, wow, really? He's like, yeah, if you become the top student here at UCLA in the chemistry department, I have no doubts you're going to get into medical school. So that became really easy for me. I was like, just get the grades and you'll be on your way to medical school. So I saw a clear path. I gave him a call before because I already had several different basically projects working on using computational tools. I'll mention that later on. and with a lot of people, including Professor Macmillan there, that turned out to be the Nobel Prize winner at a year or 2 years ago. So I was working in those projects, and I gave a call to Stanford because I couldn't access the application. I couldn't pass a certain point. I said, what's going on? I was like, Osvaldo, honestly, you cannot apply to the medical school. I said, what do you mean? It's like, yeah, but because you're not classified as a citizen, as a permanent resident, or as an international student. There's no box for you. So we cannot do anything with you. So if you're classified as an international student, then you need to have a passport and a visa, and you need to show funds that you could actually support this. So there's no box for you. Unfortunately, we cannot even consider your application. Of course, I was crushed about that moment. But I decided that after basically a couple of days to kind of rethink what I was doing, think back that why exactly did I want to become a medical student? And the only reason why I want to become a medical student because I made that promise to my uncle, to my grandpa when I left. So I was like, I can still go to get at the PhD program and still consider a doctor, right? So I decided to pursue that route. So I applied to many different schools. None of them I didn't get to any schools. And then Hal came and he's like, I'm kind of surprised that you haven't gotten to any PhD programs. Like, I thought you were great in school, and the grades, like, yeah, the grades are there, but what about your GRE? It's like, it's okay, the GRE. It's like, oh, but I'm undocumented. He's like, oh, now you're put in a different category. You're considered an international student, and now you're basically fighting for those 3-4 spots, and you're competing with the world, right? And he's like, yeah, so which school is the one that hasn't given you a response yet? And that is, this guy will teach you a lesson that be open to other people, ask for advice, because you never know who's going to help you out. And how, like shown here, kind of like a gangster, I think he stopped smoking. He just picked up the phone and he called and he's like, hey, Dean, there's an application, Osvaldo Gutierrez. I was like, he's talking to the dean of somewhere. He's like, consider his application. The next day, Dean Tantillo actually showed up basically to that's Dean Tantillo here, that turned out to be my PhD advisor, showed up to UCLA, and he's like, congratulations, you've been admitted to the PhD program. And that was it. So sometimes you could do everything you can basically on paper follow. Sometimes you need a little gangster love, right? And that's, for me, I benefit extremely from the connections that Ken Houck had. It's a network, it's a very small network. So I went to UC Davis, seemed like it was a perfect environment. I'm gonna be closer to my family in Sacramento up north. And I started working on many different projects there. And I even started working on things where for the first time I could actually see and prove to myself that computational chemistry could be very powerful. In that, and I spent so much time thinking about a project where I started modeling something that, like, for instance, Stephen Lopez does here, with the idea of designing a completely new reaction, something that would outcompete somebody in experiments. In experiments, you could go and build these molecules, test them, see if they work. But I was thinking more of, what if we test them in the computer first and then provide only one of them that will work? So we spent a lot of time on that. We connected with a professor at Thompson at Northwestern. He assigned graduate students to make this. It took him another 2.5 years to make this compound. And it turned out that it actually worked as predicted. And then we predicted the other one that would not work, another one for basically controls, and they all turned out to be correct. We submitted this paper, and the reviewers, of course, they didn't like it. They basically said, no, I think you're kind of being unethical in a way, that you're thinking that you're making a prediction, but in reality, it was all predicted. And that was kind of unfortunate because the community was not ready to really use computational chemistry to guide experiments. And sometimes they're not ready. So that, and one thing that I will mention is that in June 15, basically almost 10 years ago, that DACA executive action happened, which gave me an opportunity to have a social security number. So I could basically legalize my situation. And at that moment, I went to Dean Tantillo. I was like, you know what? I think I'm in good shape to graduate. It was 2.5 years into the PhD program. I was like, yeah, I think you have the papers. You've done all the work. Write your thesis, get a postdoc. And yeah. So I gave him the next day, I had a postdoc was offered, and I gave him also the thesis, like I could graduate. Like, wow. So I was already prepared for that moment. So the take home message is, don't wait, right? Don't wait for that moment to start writing your thesis in this case, right? Have all that ready. Once you have the job and everything else, you could then graduate. So that was the idea there, that I already had everything. He thought that maybe it's going to take him a little while to write it, but I was already preparing, waiting for that opportunity. Once something happened, that I could go on and continue my journey in academia. So I graduated. Here's my mom and my dad. We had a huge party, huge celebration I could expect. And then eventually I went to do a postdoc at University of Pennsylvania. So here I started working with Professor Kozlowski. So if you want to become a professor, usually you have to also do a postdoc training. In a way, is a way that you can take advantage of trying to become more of a faculty and build your networks. And at that moment, I started to do experiments. I went with her specifically because she wanted me to do computations, but also she was willing to give me the opportunity to be trained in experiments. So I spent a lot more time, twice the amount of time, doing a postdoc than my PhD. And that's because I wanted to learn a basically completely different technique that I could use for my future research. At that moment, I also took a gamble. I decided to apply for the advanced parole, which allow you to leave the country, not guarantee you come back, but if you're able to come back, then you become legalized in a way. You become basically, you don't have to pay a penalty, other issues that go with it. But I took that risk. I went there and it gave me the opportunity to see my grandpa. So I fulfilled that promise that I said I was not going to be back to Mexico until I became a doctor. And I saw my grandpa. We had a blast. He still remembered me. That was great. Shortly after he died, and I never saw him again. Nonetheless, I went into teaching after that. During my postdoc, basically, you either support it through grants or something else, because Kozlowski ran out of funding. So he's like, you know what, Osvaldo, can you support yourself? It's like, again, I already supported myself through the PhD. Now I have to support myself for the postdoc. So I was like, sure, I guess I started teaching, and then those funds get transferred and I get paid through that way. So I did that. I think she was kind of impressed for doing that. And I started basically networking with reconnecting with, as you can see here, Ken Hauk is here, and Marissa Kozlowski are there too, my grand mentors. I got married shortly after, and I started my independent position in 2016. So everything was great. Finally, everything started to make sense. We're having a lab. We're thinking, what kind of projects can we pursue? And of course, like everything, things get more complicated every time. So shortly thereafter, 2 months after, my mom died of cancer. So people were telling me, Osvaldo, I think this is, you want to succeed right now, but maybe you should take some time off. It's like, what time off? Is this what my mom wanted me to do? It's like, the answer is no. But one thing here that I want to point out that kind of solidified really my passion for doing research, that these two compounds shown here, actually, one of them basically extended her life, give her hope. Taxol is a compound that is used to treat breast cancer. The other one is morphine, strong, very potent for pain medicine. And it was to those moments that she couldn't even walk, she couldn't even move, and all you can see is tears from her eyes, right? And morphine became basically the way to get by through the day. So you can see the impact of medicines in your family, in people. And at that moment, it kind of also solidified what we want to do in our research program. And what we want to do in our research program is, my mom, at that moment, basically, we were very fortunate that she was living in California. In California, if you have breast cancer or testicular cancer, only those two cancers, and if you don't have the funds to pay, whether you're undocumented or documented, they actually provide a treatment for you. And I didn't know that. We were freaking out. And my mom, that's the reason that later on I found out, I always ask her, how come you didn't tell us a lot earlier that you had breast cancer? Something that you could see right before. And you're like, I knew I had breast cancer. I saw bumps. I saw it on TV, what things you look for. But so what? Well, if I had breast cancer, the treatments are so expensive. We know they were expensive. So who's going to pay for that? All it is going to give you headaches. So she decided to not tell anybody until it got really out of control. And then we found out that it's actually they could have been prevented, right? Nonetheless, like I said, I was fortunate that she was able to get that treatment. But if you can see some of these drugs here, they're super expensive. Some people can't even afford them, right? And I think that COVID situation has really basically put all this into light, that there's a lot of people out there that the United States maybe we're able to afford this vaccines, this medicines and everything else. But what about other countries? What about other families? What are they going to do if the cost of this medicine they're expensive? They basically have no hope of getting those. So instead, I focus on this review here where, as scientists, my contribution, what it could be, is really to as highlighted, to design new routes that are efficient, robust, and environmentally friendly. If you do that, then it might be able to lower the cost of medicines. And that's our research focus. We try to develop methods and use tools. And one of the tools is called computational chemistry. If you're able to save basically the pharmaceutical company, if one way to get to one drug is basically build 1 million of those, and that would take a lot of effort, time, chemicals, so on and so on. And instead, if you're able to do computational chemistry to in silico kind of know which of this compound is going to work, then you could kind of tell that company, you know what, build only this compound. Now you save them all this effort, time, and if hopefully the companies are not that greedy, then they'll go and say, you know what, this compound didn't cost us that much money because we only spent a fraction of the time trying to identify this compound. So therefore, maybe we should not make it this expensive. Whether they do that or not, that's basically beyond our research. So in that sense, what we do is that we try to basically build molecules and build methods to make them a lot cheaper. And if you look at the methods that are used to make these molecules, the one that comes across is basically this palladium cross-coupling methods that all you do is basically working with puzzle pieces. You build molecules, you create many infinite possibilities. And the idea is that sometimes it's basically 3 easy steps, like this number 1, you just build it in 3 steps, and it's $10 billion kind of industry. But this medicine is very expensive, so how can we make this one cheaper? So in that, we try to use methods that don't use palladium. They use, for instance, iron. Iron is extremely cheap compared to palladium. So we try to do that and use computational chemistry to guide the methods to do all this. So if we're able to do that, as you can see, iron, here's shown by the little Iron Man, can significantly reduce the cost of medicines. Yes, if you look at the traditional iron catalyst that is $342 at this moment, and palladium that is $30,000, it should reduce the medicines by that amount. If the medicine right now is $30,000 because you use palladium, maybe it becomes $300, much more reasonable. And also it's great for the environment because iron is abundant. You can find it everywhere, right? And palladium is a little more rare. And in terms of toxicity, which is critical for basically how expensive medicines are, iron is extremely basically non-toxic compared to palladium. So basically you could even use it as a vitamin. Our body uses iron, so it's not as toxic as palladium. So in that way, if you use the method that uses iron to design a molecule, to make a molecule, then you don't need to worry about removing that residual iron, right? You always have to worry about removing that residual palladium if you make that, because that becomes toxic. And if you take the medicine, you don't want to die, right? So the idea is to use computers to kind of accelerate this process. And then there's many different ways. One is like the one that Stephen Lopez is pursuing. Our method is to understand this type of chemistry and from there kind of design which reactions are going to work and which ones are not. So this is where, what exactly do we do? This slide is the final slide on this end, where think about, you trying to make a medicine that uses 3 different building blocks, and you want to glue them together in a specific form, A, B, and C. And you try things that typical organic chemists do. They try different catalysts, ligand, solvent, additives, temperature, pressure, all many different parameters. And you hope that you get the desired transformation, the P1, that product. But in reality, all the time you get a series of different reactions. You get this other 2, so now you have to worry about removing those, and you get some that are not known. You have no idea what they are. So let's say you only get 5% yield of this. Well, that's not going to be a practical method. So how do you go about increasing the yield of this? So one of the strategies is to, let's see if we're able to shut down this pathways here. You have no idea besides trial and error. Another one is like simply try different things, and hopefully one different recipe of this leads to 80% yield of this, and then we just discard the other 20% of stuff that we're going to call side products. Our method is a little different. Rather than do this very expensive trial and error, like I said, I would argue this is the most expensive thing in industry, and you cannot do this in a large scale. If you're already in the very late stage of building a molecule, and you want to make this in a kilogram scale, you cannot be playing around with kilogram scale trial and error. That's not going to happen. That's going to be super, super expensive. So instead, what we try to do is use computational tools to kind of understand, where does this come from? Like map out the surface. How does this start to glue together? Where does this other one come from? what it interacts, right? So we see it more as basically people grabbing things, put them in together, and so on. Like we're building a concrete in our backyard right now, and then it takes a whole team to build that concrete. So in a way, it's like, who was responsible for making this corner? Who is responsible for making this other thing? Who is responsible for the surfacing and so on? And the idea is that then we can focus on, you know what, all we care is about this one, then let's shut down this one. Let's identify what's responsible for making this, and we're going to cut it. What's responsible for this, and we're going to cut it. And the way that we cut things in computational chemistry is we raise the barrier. We make it harder for basically for this process to happen. So we're going to raise the barrier, let's say, of this one. We don't want the orange pathway. In silico, we could basically model and say we're able to get the barrier to go really, really high. Then now the reaction is not going to make that product. So then you can start shutting down the other ones, and we could do this because we have the computational resources, and they could only get better by basically doing all this in silico. And the idea is that only the P1 is going to be the one that is much faster to make. So then the idea that we could optimize this, then we go back and we make changes to A, B, and C to the building blocks themselves to glue this. At the same time, we'll also do this. You cannot get away with not doing this trial and error. We do some trial and error as well. But if we combine both rational and trial and error, we're able to accelerate these reactions. And we have been successful at doing that. We are able to kind of model a very complicated reaction where you only had two components coming together. That took like 70 years to basically build and anti-selectively basically control one stereochemistry. We use computational modeling to understand how this process happened, and we're able to use that to quickly design a series of 3-component reactions. And now we're moving into 4-component reactions, which the complexity is much, much, much larger. And now we start making really molecules that start resembling things that you could use in pharmaceuticals. So with that, basically, we got some attention that one of their papers got a lot of attention in terms of really building molecules that can significantly lower the cost of medicines. And the idea is that we're going to continue doing this with the overall goal, like I said, that to provide a method that could replace or at least complement palladium chemistry, and then to build basically these molecules at a much lower cost. And hopefully everybody, not just the United States, but the world will benefit from this. That's why we don't patent anything. So with that, thank you. I'll be happy to take any questions. I don't know if I took more or less of the time, but I could easily go back to other things. So.
No, that was great. Yeah, we've got plenty of time for discussion and questions and such. So yeah, who has questions for Osvaldo?
I have a question.
Yep.
So thank you for your talking. It's very interesting and very inspiring. And yesterday I happened to attend another professor's lecture. It's about the malaria research on the malaria. And both of your research are very interesting and is very needed by the world. However, when I was taking the microbiology, I heard that, you know, we are running out of antibiotics very soon, because it's a synthesis of a chemical compound, and definitely the bacteria they are much more smarter than our human speed. So what I'm thinking is, they were saying there's a new trend of research on the medicine, which is they try to, instead of synthesis more chemical compound, they try to discover the bacteria against the bacteria. So how do you see like the chemical computational chemistry is going to help this trend?
Yeah, I think the cool thing about computational chemistry is very broad, and it could help any different area of chemistry, whether it's materials, pharmaceutical research, almost polymers. I mean, computational chemistry is really at the forefront of research, and it could be used in multiple different ways. And this way, one thing that it could do is that if we're able to model, and let's say hypothetically model basically how these things that are interacting, the proteins or the chemical, the antibiotic binding, or how is it really destroying the bacteria. If we really understand that at the molecular level, then we could rationally kind of make changes, respond to how the virus are replicating, basically respond to the mutations that are created. Because oftentimes they get mutated when we don't know really how to overcome that problem. They just don't work anymore. But is lagging in terms of the mechanistic understanding. Why do they don't work anymore? We don't know that, and it is really hard to keep up. But that's when I think computational chemistry could really be of use in that, and that it might be able to help basically guide into how you might be able to make changes to respond to the really rapid changes that the buyers are doing. So I think it could definitely help on that end. That's beyond my area, but I could definitely see basically the use of computational chemistry in that end.
Thank you.
From the students. If not, I'm gonna start pointing fingers.
You really will. So anything about Osvaldo's story, or
Audrey, you have a question or a concern?
Mm, I guess, what was your favorite piece of research that you've done so far?
Yeah, my favorite piece of research has been I guess there's no favorite, it's just more challenging or less challenging, right? But I think the one that was very challenging and also really excited at the end that turned out to work is the one that I did as my PhD, where again, for the first time for myself, we kind of show that you could predict something. And it was very satisfying that somebody else went and built that molecule. And it was even more satisfying that it took them so long. Sometimes they could build it in a couple months and they say, yeah, it does work. But this one actually took them 2 years, 2.5 years to make these molecules and figure out that things that we can predict through computation, the boiling point and things of that nature. And eventually they play around with that to build this molecule that actually turned out to work. So more than the application itself, it just kind of showed that to me, I needed to be convinced that we could use computational chemistry to really design new compounds. And that was the first time that I really saw firsthand that you could do that. Yeah.
which is a good lesson. Some of these projects, right, can take years, literally years. And you think you've got, I think I'm definitely guilty of this, of, telling students, this is a 2-month thing, we'll have a paper, it'll be great.
Yeah.
And then, a year later, we're still trying to figure out the issues, right, that have come up from the original 2 months of work, right? So
yeah, but I think it's true that it is a paper. If they do some research, eventually we turn out to be a paper. I mean, as an undergraduate, I thought I was done with one project, and it took 10 years to publish that paper because the story kept getting larger and larger, actually even more exciting. So at the end, it turned out to be an awesome paper, but it was a whole story that it was initiated by me, and eventually multiple people got involved and eventually got published, but it took a long time. But I think that a lot more came out of that story than just a simple basically paper that this is what we have, this is what we're reporting, this is the dead end project. It actually was kind of exciting that it opened up a whole new area of research on that end. So kind of cool.
So one maybe general or speculative question, right? So you started at Sacramento City College, right? All right. So when you were a community college student, right, like some of our attendees in this talk, could you have ever imagined where you are now, or even like where you would be, in 3 years from that point?
No, at that point, like I said, I was just trying to survive and trying to see if I could move one semester at a time. Yeah. With the goal of eventually making it to medical school, but in reality, deep inside, I knew it was going to be very challenging, and most likely I'm going to find other things that would distract me. So I had my own construction company at that time. I had to give that away. I was working at several different jobs that I really like, but at the same time, I knew that we're not going to be sustainable. That I saw is good money right now, and I had a lot of the family were proud of me. But in the long term, 20 years down the road, is this something that would take me where I want to be? The answer was no. So I kind of gave those jobs that eventually I saw that they're not going to take me. And the only one that at the end continued to do that was chemistry and continue going to school. But yeah, I never imagined even making it really beyond community college just because I saw it really hard. I got rejected. I started applying to 4-year schools after my 3rd year community college. I got rejected 3 times. So for 3 years, I basically didn't get anywhere, not even to the local kind of 4-year school that was there. My grades were not good enough, I guess, because I really screwed up my 1st year. I got really bad grades. So my GPA was really low for a long time. And eventually I was very fortunate that at the end, one school, basically a couple of schools admitted me, and I just went with that. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Dan,
Sorry, go ahead, Wyatt. You go
I
ahead.
guess I would ask, like, I know you talked about some of these. Were there any other like major events that caused your mindset to change about what you're doing with your research?
Yeah, I think another one is basically luck, right? I mean, I tell the story that is very kind of inspiring. That yes, after my mom's, I really found a passion trying to make this work, but it was also very frustrating not to see in the lab that nothing worked. So for a long time, nothing really worked. So we're not really building the molecules that we wanted to build. We finally built something that I thought it was decent. We submitted for basically to get funding from a grant. We got destroyed on the grants. Basically said, no, you're not going to get in this field. And that was kind of very challenging. So I think a lot of it was really luck that it turned out that at the end, the stuff that started working, I was like, I think we could capitalize on this. I was always looking for the opportunities. But oftentimes I think in all this, even in my personal trajectory, a lot of it is luck, right? Finding the person. I mean, Ken Hauk was very supportive. It was just luck that day he didn't ignore that email. I ignore emails all the time. I was very fortunate that he didn't know that email, or else I don't know what I would be, to be honest. The same thing with research. A lot of times we work so much on one project and it never led to anything, but it actually just provided training for the students. And eventually, once we find something that was kind of interesting, we decided to pursue it a little more, and that's where this whole area opened up. But that was not the original plan by any means. Right? We just now trying to capitalize on that kind of event that happened.
My question is, like, when you publish your first paper, can you talk about that experience and how much help you were getting?
I started crying. So my first paper, as a faculty, started crying, and that's because 3 times before he got rejected, and the reviewers were really actually kind of nasty people. I mean, it's anonymous reviews, but they don't need to make a lot of these comments. So when he finally came out, it was a whole relief. At that time, somebody basically published almost identical work, and it was a big name. So we thought that they're not going to give us a chance, but it was basically super excited and kind of that's kind of solidified my goal to continue academia, because I saw the editors being not biased. That they said, well, this is the same work as this other major player in chemistry, but we're going to treat both papers the same, and the reviewers also. So I thought that it was a very welcome community in that end, a very fair community. But yeah, of course, at that moment you start crying because there's so many different emotions that you might not make it. I keep telling my students, right, in particular, it's like, oh, we got this, we can make it work. But in reality, deep inside, I was thinking, this thing is not going to work, and eventually things are going to come out that all the research is not going to lead to anything, and that's something that professors always have to deal with, right? But finally, when it came out, I was like, of course, I knew it was going to come out, but deep inside, I knew that we're struggling with that. But yeah. That's very exciting.
So when you inside you were desperate, crying, but like during the daytime, you still have to, to be strong to encourage your students. So
exactly.
What sustained you to continue move on?
I think my family, my friends, and the determination that this career was for me, because of course you have a lot of negativity around, but it's just that you want to show that you want to say, you know what? I'm going to give it my best shot at this. And if it doesn't work, then they'll fire me after 5 years, 6 years, if you don't get tenure. And then I can pursue the other career that I wanted, which is community college professor. So from then on, I was like, just focus on trying to do the best. And if it doesn't work, I mean, I'll feel bad for the students because they keep working really, really hard. But at the same time, we can't do anything, right? But yeah, it was that.
Thank you.
Daniel hasn't asked any questions.
I'm trying to think of how I want to ask a specific question. Just give me a minute. I'm sorry.
Or comments.
Yeah. So first, I'd like to say thank you so much for the presentation. So I'm an international student, and I need to leave Brazil and come to the US because I want to work with research. And I know how difficult it's like to be in this way. And I would like to ask about, so as you say, like we have the Turner track and you don't know like what's gonna be the outcome. So, but why you choose like to continue and pursue the Turner track?
Why did I want to continue the tenure track?
Yeah.
It really came down to my postdoc advisor. One day, out of nowhere, she came and tapped me like right now. All of a sudden, somebody comes and tapped me. It's like, hey, Osvaldo, what are you doing? It's like, oh, good thing I was not in social media, right? And so I was like, I'm working. And she's like, what do you want to do with it in the rest of your life, your career? And I was like, I think I want to become a professor. Like, okay, what kind? I was like, what do you mean, what kind? I thought there was only one kind of professor. It's like, tenure track, non-tenure track, teaching. I was like, no, I guess like you, tenure track, I guess. And she's like, okay, which school? Top 100, top 50, top 25, top 10 programs. I was like, why? I need to make that decision now. So I kind of play it safe. I was like, top 50. And then that's when she gave me advice of how to go into, if you want to be in a top 50 program, how would you get to that point? And then I just kind of continue for the challenge, I guess, in some ways, because I saw that there was not a lot of people that looked like me in those careers. So for that sense, I was like, let's see it. And if it doesn't work, at least you kind of start paving the way for other students, right? For other people. So I started just kind of showing my face around at every single conference that I get invited, just to at least kind of mix it up and say, hey, we're here. And I think we belong here. And we're gonna do our best to maintain it and be at this level. So in that way, I keep kind of challenging myself to do more on that aspect. And that's why I kind of continue on this career.
Yeah, if I can just piggyback on this real quick. So, this is something actually we've been talking about, I think, somewhat broadly in the group is, what do you want out of your PhD, right? What do you want out of this community college, summer research experience, right? It's really actually much more of a, personal decision, right? That your advisor is meant to kind of guide you through and to make that happen, right? So if you want to go, be a faculty in like a top 10 program, like Melissa, asked Osvaldo, that's fine, right? But there are things you have to do, right? And if you want to like get a PhD and like go teach high school afterwards, there are things you have to do, right? And I think the advisor's role, right, is helping make that happen, but it has to come from internal, right? You can't just say, I'll just do whatever like my advisor says, because in a way, like, that communication is really important. And oftentimes I think we have to have that conversation with ourselves first, right? Before, talking with, advisors or making plans, right? So, something I always encourage people to do is think about what you really want to get out of this PhD, and then maybe break it down into smaller parts. Like, what am I going to get out of this summer? What does next year look like? Does that fit into the goal for me, like me, the student, not me, Stephen? And, that's something to think about.
And if somebody doesn't, in your dreams, whatever you want to pursue after, if somebody says that you cannot do it, right? Question also that if this is not for you. I mean, I saw a lot of people that basically said you could do something else. You could do something else better. You should go here. And some professors actually, not to me, it never happened to me, but I met a lot of people where they want to become a tenure track faculty, but their advisors, mentors, they were like, no, I'm not going to write you a letter for that because I don't think you're cut up to do that. So that's why choosing an advisor is really critical. And you have to choose an advisor, not because of the science is great, but it's really choosing an advisor that is going to be an advocate for you, that is going to be a friend, that is going to be somebody that is going to guide you. The research will come after. If you're having a lot of fun in there, if you're really enjoying it, you have a good relationship with your mentor, I think that goes long ways. And you don't want to get yourself in a situation. And there's ways to find out what kind of people are like that, where talk to other people in the group, where they're not going to be as supportive, right? They're not going to be as supportive. And I met a lot of people that was like, I did the work. How come you don't want to write me a letter to become a faculty? It's like, I just don't think you will make it. I said, well, that's not up to the advisor to do that, right? But that will put you in a really bad situation of choosing your dreams. So I think like anything, any job or everything else, sometimes don't just get any job, right? I mean, sometimes it's needed to make money or an advisor to, because it's the only advisor that you have. But in reality, always look for, are you the best person that I need to be around? Are you the one that's going to take them to the next level? Are you going to be supportive? And those are critical things that we should always be asking.
It's a really good point.
For Daniel.
Oh yeah.
So I haven't found a way to formulate this into a question, so I guess I'll just make it more of a comment. So I see a lot of overlap between, I guess, like your story and mine in a lot of ways. I mean, I came from a pretty big family myself. I have 7 brothers and 1 sister, and I, you know, just growing up, I didn't have a ton, and honestly, I didn't like even know I wanted to study chemistry until like 6 months before I applied to college in the first place. I didn't know I wanted to go to grad school until like 2 to 3 months before I applied. So I don't know. It's really just refreshing to see that it all worked out for you, and it's almost like reassuring in a way for me, having heard your story, seeing that it worked out for you as well.
Yeah, I think that's in a way that's why myself. I mean, this is great that Stephen has created this program, but in a way, there's the reason why it continues, because I was always searching for those kinds of stories, right? Because you want to see yourself that if somebody makes it, that you will make it as well. I mean, why do we get so passionate for Stephen Curry to make it in the NBA? Because he's not your traditional NBA player. And in the way, when I was trying to go to medical school, I paid for even going to this AMSA's kind of conferences that they had in terms of identify and look for people that looked like me or had similar stories. Like, yes, because now at least you have something that you could point out and said, yeah, I know some people that have made it. I know some people that are in that kind of field. I know some people that are being successful, and it's a critical to have those role models, right? Or to know of people even. I mean, I knew a lot of people that I never met them, but I knew about their career trajectories and everything else, and I feed on that. And I read some of their books because I wanted to see somebody that kind of resembled kind of my story and that had made it. And it was another undocumented that is now basically really big in research in neuroscience. But yeah, so I think that, thank you for that comment, and I think that that's really the main point of kind of sharing the story and to do that.
I heard you mention about neuroscience, because my son, he always think he's want to do some research in neuroscience. So may I have some input on the neuroscience area?
Yeah, neuroscience, I mean, it's been a really hot area for a long time. And what makes it really interesting and fascinating is that we don't understand almost anything off of it, right? So I think it's kind of, in a way, it's a really exciting area of research. And whether you're going to do brain surgery or something else, because it's an area that is not well understood at all. So I think trying to go into something like that, I think even if they just kind of scratch the surface on some of those, is really is going to cause a big impact in terms of society. So I think it's not a well-studied field. So I think there's a huge investments that we need to focus on understanding the brain and all those, because it has many different consequences, but it's just very complicated. And even in drug development as well. I mean, neuroscience is very broad, though. It's this huge areas, like I want to study humans. So I think it's just what part of neuroscience I want to study, right? But that, yeah, it's definitely a huge area with a lot of potential that it's going to continue for a long time.
Do you see there's a connection between neuroscience and computational chemistry?
Neuroscience and computational chemistry?
Yeah, are they related?
Yeah, there's like I said, computational chemistry in a way is a tool. It's like saying, is synthesis applicable to neuroscience? The answer is yes, because you need to make molecules. So now computational chemistry got to that level that is competing with experimental chemistry, which is you make molecules, now you model molecules. Now the idea is that oftentimes especially like, for instance, the brain, those proteins, you're not going to abstract a little protein from somebody's brain to study it, right? So I think that you have to rely on indirect tools and that's where computational chemistry can really lead into. If you're able to map the brain or somehow understanding at the molecular level what's going on, you might be able to track things. I mean, that's a very ambitious goal, but I think trying to achieve that goal is going to lead us into a lot of good things, right? Like somebody once said, in the pursuit of trying to make metals to gold, we actually discover so much different chemistry, and that's actually became more impactful than just making gold, right? So I think if we could pursue trying to map out something as complicated as the brain and understand the brain, maybe we'll never understand the brain, but it's going to lead us into so many different areas of science that we did not anticipate. And so many different tools are going to be developed in trying to get to that goal. So oftentimes I think the journey is more important than the goal itself, right? But you always have to have a goal in order to push through the journey, I think.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think there's no, or if there are no other questions, maybe we'll just like wrap up here. Are there any other questions? Just double checking. Okay, so let's thank Osvaldo one more time for his participation and his wisdom here.
So much. Really appreciate it, and see you all.
Yeah, see you around.
See-
Bye.
see ya.